Jack Posobiec, welcome back to the show. It is great to have you on again so soon. You've just come out with another book that is, I got to figure out how you did this. I can't even write one book. I don't know how you've written multiple
So
books in one year, but you
yeah,
just came out with
well, first of all, I don't
Bulletproof.
recommend it. I do not recommend
Okay,
it.
because we just had you on the show like 2, 3 months ago talking about Unhumans, your last book. And now suddenly today you've got another book out, Bulletproof. What in the heck? Where do you find the time?
That was a great. Well, I don't. I just it's called not sleeping basically. But when I do sleep, I get the best night's sleep in the whole wide world with mypillow.com from the book Poso, and that you kind of set me up for that one. And the basically look, you're right, and thank you again for having me on for that previous book. It was very successful, very blessed in that instance, and you know as we were in the process of basically doing the media tour for the previous book about arguing that we are in an irregular communist revolution, and we laid out this thesis that, well, if we're in an irregular Congress or a congressional or a, I want to keep saying congressional communist revolution. There we go. I wrote a book about this.
Same thing.
That I know, right? And it kind of is, isn't it? Yeah, Freudian slip. That we would expect to see things like lawfare, like censorship of free speech, political prisoners, and then, of course, political assassinations. And then we had seen 3 of the 4 up until the book came out. And then actually in the process of the book coming out, Steve Bannon was thrown into prison as a political prisoner who wrote the foreword for the book. And then 2 weeks after the book came out was the first assassination attempt on President Trump in my home state of Pennsylvania.
Oh,
And
wow.
so as that all happened, I was working, I do these with a co-author with Joshua Lysak, who's just fantastic and phenomenal at all this. And we were sort of chatting about it that day, and we said, what should we do? Like, what do we do? What do we do with this historic moment for the country? And, you don't even have to be a supporter of the guy to understand that. And, hopefully understand that had that bullet gone 1 inch to the right, that we'd be in a very different situation in this
Yeah.
country than we are right now, which we also talk about in the book in Bulletproof. And we said, we're going to write a book. And so we actually started writing on July 13th of this year, and we didn't have a book deal. We hadn't even discussed it with our publisher. We didn't even know if we were going to finish it, but it's just sort of what we knew how to do. So we started writing a book then and there that very day. And eventually it got to the point where, we told the publisher, and he said, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot. So he supported us, and we thought it was very important to get this out prior to the election, which we have done. So today is the day it is released, and just kind of like we were saying earlier, but a lot of late nights, a lot of lack of sleep, and a lot of going through and pulling together research and consulting with sources, getting documents, and conducting eyewitness interviews with people who were there, because I don't trust the federal government. So we went and redid a lot of this work. And it also actually kind of helped in a sense. I mean, not that any of this was good that it happened, but I just knew a lot of people who were there because it was in Pennsylvania. And I just know a lot of people in Pennsylvania. It's where I'm from, other part of the state where I was born, but I still just had friends who were there. And so, those interviews were able to parlay themselves into the book. And then we started digging deeper into the federal law enforcement response, or shall we say the lack thereof, a federal law enforcement response.
Yeah.
And, and just on the writing it note that, as we were all set to send actually, we had already submitted our manuscript on September 12th. And then 3 days later, this Ukrainian foreign fighter named Ryan Routh decides to attempt to kill him again at his golf course there in West Palm Beach. And I had to make that phone call to the publisher and say, you like in a Hollywood movie or something, I guess, you said, stop the presses. You need to stop the presses because this book comes out. But then I got to find out that it turns out saying stop the presses in real life is actually much more expensive than you realize, because once you've already printed a number of books and book covers, that you have to, you got to kind of eat that in the real world.
Right.
And so we had to pull up a lot of stuff, but whatever. I said, I don't care. This isn't about, I'm not doing this for like money or anything. And, we're looking at different ways that we can potentially even donate the proceeds to this, that it's just about getting the story all together, all the crazy loose threads, and putting them in one place, asking the questions that nobody seems to ask, and bringing the story and giving the story the prominence that I think it deserves. Because, here we are 2 weeks out from an election, and nobody in conservative media or liberal media is even talking about this,
Right. Yeah.
that these things are ongoing and someone is trying to kill Donald Trump.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just completely gone from the news cycle, as
Yeah.
if these things never really even happened. And I want to get into the different theories on it. There's, of course, the lone shooter theory of that these two were just crazies, and they were operating on their own. And then there's, of course, the stories that were coming out of it was Iran that tried to kill Trump. It was plotted by them. And then there's, of course, the ideas that maybe it was an inside job in some way, or that
Right.
people within our own government were involved. And I want to get into all of that. Before we dive into the assassination attempts and what you uncovered, I do want to ask you just about the election itself. We are two
Yeah.
weeks away today. Your book comes out, and you said you got it out before election. You certainly did. 2 weeks to the day for election day. It's so interesting seeing, for one, I don't trust the polls, especially after 2016. Hillary Clinton's going to win. Hillary Clinton's going to win, right? It was all that. And then obviously she didn't. So the polls, I think, are often used as a psyop to get people to believe something is different than it really is. I have a really hard time believing that these two are neck and neck. And that's how they're trying to spin it. They're saying that, Trump he's edged a little bit of a lead in Michigan, or he's edged a little bit of a lead here, or no, Kamala Harris is in the lead in these other swing states. And I just have a hard time believing anybody would vote for her. I mean, has she even said anything at all about anything? I mean, she
No.
doesn't answer questions at her town halls. She doesn't have a policy agenda whatsoever. She just says, when I was a little girl, or I'll think about it, or this is something we should discuss. I mean, I don't know how anybody, I'm just so confused. Do you think it's as neck and neck as they claim?
I mean, certainly in some states. I will say this. So again, Pennsylvania is my home state, and I've spent a lot of time going around to different events there in the past couple of weeks. Really, I mean, it's been a long year this month, and most of it is spent in Pennsylvania for me. And what I will say is this: is that, and everyone's asked me this question, is that, and I was talking to Don Jr. yesterday about this very same thing, is that in Pennsylvania, we are seeing more money poured into our state than we have in any election prior in history. And so I think all in, the estimates are that it's going to be $500 million that goes into PA. That's just for one state,
Wow.
which if I remember correctly, in 2008, that was like the entire national, it was Obama and McCain, that I think the entire election was only $500 million. So now
Right.
that same amount of money, here we are just a couple of years later, is going to be in one state. And I see that. So I see when I'm driving around Pennsylvania, I see Kamala Harris billboards everywhere. You hear Kamala Harris ads everywhere. You go in, and when you drive around, when you download your podcast, it's always geographic specific ads you get sometimes. So I'll get Kamala Harris ads that are coming onto my phone,
But do you see Kamala Harris signs and bumper stickers that people are putting out there?
I see signs. I do.
Really, that people themselves,
yeah.
like voters, are putting out on their lawns, or
Typically,
putting out in
funny
their
enough,
businesses.
we've noticed that there's two places that I've seen it in Pennsylvania. It'll either be, and it's interesting dichotomy, because it's either like really, really poor neighborhoods or really, really rich neighborhoods. And it seems like those are the two places that it's either like in front of a mansion or in front of like a row home. And those are the two places, and I'm just saying, that's what I've seen going around Pennsylvania. But then everybody else is Trump, like literally everybody
The
else,
middle class.
or like,
Especially in Pennsylvania.
RFK, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I would just think in Pennsylvania, especially where the assassination attempt happened, the big one, that people would be all in for that would solidify. Which way did Pennsylvania go in the last election between Trump and Biden?
So Pennsylvania's been a swing state now. So in 2016,
Right.
it went for Trump, which is the first time that Pennsylvania had gone for Republican since 1988. Then in 2020, it swung back to Joe Biden.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Currently has, prior to that, Pennsylvania had a split representation in the in the U.S. Senate. So you had Pat Toomey as the Republican, and John Fetterman, by getting ahead of myself here, but Bob Casey as the Democrat. John Fetterman then came up to backfill Pat Toomey. So now there are two Democrats. Currently, there's a Democrat governor named Josh Shapiro, who is 5'3",
Mm-hmm.
and you also
You
have,
just
I
had
have
to
to
throw
say that
that
the
in there,
time.
didn't you, Jack?
Yes, I do.
You got
Yes, it's
something
actually,
against short guys?
I have no. I have something against Josh Shapiro for ruining my state and my hometown and my county and all the insanity and lies that that guy has done. And so it's now, though, all of a sudden Trump has come in, and it's because of his support with working class and middle class
Mm-hmm.
that he is able to swing so many of the people, because we have a lot of those, working class Democrats in Pennsylvania were very much so. PA's, I mean, I could talk for so long about this, but PA is basically like three states, if you will. So where I'm from is the eastern industrial side of Pennsylvania, and it's been totally hollowed out since since the 1980s, really since NAFTA. Then in the middle, then you also have a little bit of like the Acela corridor part of Pennsylvania, that's like Philly and like some of the area surrounding it, the main
Mm-hmm.
line. And then you have the middle of Pennsylvania, which James Carville famously referred to as Pennsyltucky, because you basically have like Kentucky right in the middle. It's Appalachia. That's where the mountains are, all these ranges. That's where State College is, Harrisburg, the Amish down in Lancaster Country, or the Amish country in Lancaster County. And then out west, you've got Pittsburgh, and that's the beginning of the former Steel Belt, which is now the Rust Belt, because
Mm-hmm.
all of those manufacturing jobs. And I was just in Pittsburgh, and as a Pennsylvanian, I even went to the Steelers game. I showed some support, and it really is a place that's been totally, it was very working class before. It's also very Democrat, but it's a place where people are willing to work with a guy that wants to give them jobs. That's what they vote
Yeah.
on more than anything else. They vote with their wallets.
So, long story short, do you think Trump's going to win or lose?
He's in very good position. And with my political operative hat on, I guess I would say he's in very good position. He's in better position than he was in 2016 to win. But just knowing having gone through the experience of 2020, I couldn't sit here, and I don't think anyone worth their salt could sit there and unequivocally say they know what's going to happen on election day. I just know that
I don't know.
I've certainly been whipping votes, and I've seen a lot more life. And I was with Elon Musk on Sunday at this town hall in Pittsburgh, and when you see the richest man in the world, also someone who's obviously a celebrity in his own right, going out there and driving a lot of votes by people out, you don't know, because there's no Republicans certainly have never tried this strategy before of early voting in Pennsylvania, and pushing for early voting really across all 7 swing states. So it's sort of one of those, it seems like it's working, but we just don't know. We don't know.
I also am just not totally convinced that we're in control of our elections. I'm not.
Well, there's a whole bunch of that too.
Right. And, so whoever, if we're not in control as voters.
I will say this.
Yeah.
I will say this. It may not be because, does it seem like Kamala Harris is acting as if she's about to win or has it in the bag? Does it feel like the regime is acting as though they totally control what's going to happen? I don't think so. And the assassination attempts, the 2 of them that have taken place already, and the threats which are ongoing, issues that haven't even been made public yet, and different things that have happened, like with his motorcade and stuff involving drones that, haven't even really made it to press yet, which we talk about in the book. I just don't think all of that would be happening if there were any other way to pull him out. I mean, think about it, right? They started with trying to censor him. And supporters, and as they were censoring so many people across the internet, but then Elon changed that, and then it was the lawfare. Okay, we'll put him in jail. Well, that fell apart, and then when that fell apart, they said, okay, we're going to try to pull him from the ballot. And they couldn't even pull him from the ballot because that didn't work. Supreme Court shut that all down. So, what do you have left? What you have left is the 1963 JFK option, that is the ultimate option to get rid of a politician, is you physically take them out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it still doesn't mean that that we're in control. I mean, I understand your point completely, that they wouldn't go to this level if they thought, oh, now we got this, we're totally in control. But if they believe that there's more than one force, for example, that's in control. So if it's not the voters, if we just take us out of it, and it's some other way of manipulating our elections, if there's maybe competing interests there, then they might still go down this path. If they think, okay, Russia's doing something on one side, and then I don't know, Israel's doing something on another, or there's another country or entity doing something. You know what I mean? I'm
That's
just
right.
not willing to put everything.
Well, I mean,
I
you're right in the sense that we don't know what we don't know, and there's a lot of
Right,
competing interests, and obviously there's been threats, there's been foreign threats, there's Ukraine-based threats as well with
right,
and we can talk about that as in addition. So you're right, there is, and I do think that sometimes people have this overly simplistic view that the regime is controlled by one person, but it's not. It's not like there's one king who sits up there behind the scenes and makes the call. You do have these various competing interests that reveal themselves through various acts of government or various acts of the State Department or Congress or these
right.
various entities, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all in concert with one another. I've always kind of referred to Washington D.C. as like it's basically like Game of Thrones. There are many different houses, and they're all vying for power and all vying for various different interests.
Yeah, yeah, it's very Game of Thrones in my mind is probably
Oh yeah.
what's going on. But you know what? Maybe, and I would love to know for sure that the voters actually are voting and having a say, and we still do
Well,
have
I'll say
control of our
this. I'll say
elections.
this. If do they, is there ability in these swing states, particularly in places like Atlanta, Philadelphia, Detroit, and Milwaukee, to, with the Democrat Party machines that are there to, essentially generate ballots? Sure, of course. But to do so at such a high clip and such a high rate would obviously be observable. And
Hmm.
so that's why you hear these phrases like too big to rig and swamp the vote that have been used, because if you increase that margin, then you increase the amount of necessary votes to get over the delta. And
Right.
so I've sort of flippantly referred to this as the margin of fraud. So the idea is that if you win, you actually have to come in higher than the margin of fraud. So when you go to the polls and they say, oh, the polls are close, the polls are close. Well, if Trump doesn't win by +5 in these states, or then they will try to find a way to use the ballot generation machines with all of these different ballot processes that exist now, including overseas, to push that out through the election. But if that's really only going to be enough for about 3 to 4%, or even less than that, because once you go beyond that threshold, it becomes very easy to detect.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the assassination attempts. There's three, I think, main theories out there. The first
Right.
one, which seems like they've just written off as the way, is these are lone shooters, crazy guys.
Is your official
What do you
narrative? Yeah.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Well, look,
Thomas
so
Brooks, I
I
mean,
don't.
this guy's young, right? And they're claiming that that, I mean, that one seems really, maybe I believe the second one, Ryan, is a lone shooter operating on his own, out of anger or out of will for Ukraine. I have a harder time believing it with Thomas Matthew Crooks.
Well, with Crooks, one of the big issues with him is that he is able, of course, and we go through the book in detail this, he is able to become the beneficiary of 12 independent security failures, any of which would have prevented him from taking those shots that day. And yet, how was it that he was able to achieve all of this, and that all of these failures happen on the same day that a trained marksman with malicious intent attends a Trump rally and goes to shoot him? It is inexplicable. And in fact, we went to GPT-4 Omni, and we conducted a little bit of a social experiment. And we said, AI, we plugged all of it in. We said, okay, here are the 12 independent failures, and what's the probability that all would happen? The same question I just asked you. And we plug it all in, and GPT says the probability would be 1 in 1 septillion, which is the
Oh,
same idea as
geez.
if you took a coin, flipped it 93 times, and every single time in a row it came up heads
Yeah,
93 times, which if you
yeah.
or I tried at the casino, we'd be arrested. We'd be hauled off
Right,
very quickly.
right.
And then something a bit more ominous came out of GPT-4 Omni, was that it said the extreme unlikelihood of this probability makes us believe that it is more than likely that this did not happen by chance alone. And that's the
Okay.
computer. That is the
Yeah.
computer, putting that out. And so when we talk about this, something that I really go back on is this phrase of intentional neglect and intentional negligence. And, why was it that there was an agent who was the site lead that had only had 4 years on the job in the entire Secret Service, someone who
Hmm.
had just graduated from the Surface Academy a couple of years ago. And look, when any politician is holding a rally like this, outdoors, open air, in a contentious political environment, and obviously someone as high profile as Donald J. Trump, they know that this is the potentially most fatal thing that any politician can do. So you would want security all over the place. And
Right.
yet, consistently, it seems as though the B team was the one that was sent to this rally. Then we see the security denial of security requests to them. And you even hear things like, and just going through some of the detailed knowledge that we have, these independent security failures, failing to show up for the Secret Service sync meeting, doesn't talk to local law enforcement. They're not on the same radio frequencies. They deny the radios. And I think most importantly, though, for me, is that the Secret Service did not hold Trump backstage. They knew for 27 minutes that there was a suspicious person of interest that they knew at least had a rangefinder, and they knew he
Yeah.
was near a building, and they knew he was near a rooftop, and he was in fact jumping from rooftop to rooftop, as we can see in this footage. And at any political event, you don't really expect the main speaker to be on time. So it would have been easiest thing in the world. And I've got an earpiece in right now, and all you have to do is click that little ear and say, "Hey, hold the president, hold him
Right.
backstage
Right.
for a couple of minutes. We're dealing with something." And it could have been a situation where nobody even knew that, hey, somebody's been arrested, and the story just completely goes away. And so why did they not allow, or excuse me, why did they allow President Trump to walk onto that stage? And so, because we don't trust the federal government, we've actually taken it upon ourselves to hire our own private investigation team. So we hired
Oh.
a couple of PIs that are licensed in Pennsylvania, and they've been going through the Bethel Park area where Thomas Crooks lived, and the Butler, Pennsylvania rally area, that fairgrounds where this all took place. And we're doing our own investigation. And in the book Bulletproof, this is actually the preliminary investigative report, the first one that's come out on this situation. We've got text message in here. We've got the sign-in logs for his gun range that are in here. We've got interviews with his neighbors in here. And, we're not naming anyone or going after anyone who that we can't prove anything against, but we are showing that there's a lot more to this story. Suspicious cars that were going to and from Crooks's house prior to the shooting, even a device analysis that we put together, which shows he appeared to have been in communication with burner phones, burner devices, which would be in addition to the encrypted overseas email accounts that the FBI has said that they just, for some reason, can't get into, and the IEDs, these improvised explosive devices, which he is able to build on his own. And we know that he had skill in computers and robotics. We know that he has had 1500 SAT, and so highly, highly intelligent individual. But these bombs that were made, very sophisticated. These were not pipe bombs. These were not pressure cooker bombs like we saw at the Boston bombing and the Tsarnaev brothers back in 2013. That these were sophisticated liquid chemical, along with essentially ammo cans with a remote detonator he had in his pocket. He had the remote that he could have used to then detonate his car. And so the idea that all of this comes together simply by himself, I think it just it flies in the face of reason. It flies in the face of common sense. And so this is the major issue that we see.
What about with Ryan Routh?
Well, with Ryan Routh, one of the things that we see happen here is, so first hear about the situation, and I'm trying to find out more about this guy, and we get a picture of him. I always say this, and when I'm working at humanevents.com, and whenever a story like this pops, it's give me a picture, get me a picture. And so we get the picture of Ruth, and then, and people have seen the story, but I did the initial legwork on it where we ran his photo through a facial recognition software and put this into a database because I was looking for a social media presence. I was looking for a social media footprint, the same with Thomas Matthew Crooks, but usually people would use their face as their profile picture. So even if we weren't able to find one under his name, perhaps we could have found one with his profile picture. And indeed, we did find an X account and a Facebook account. But then on the first page of search results, we also found a propaganda video that was put together by the Azov Battalion. And and this is within just a few minutes of hearing the guy's name. And then we find all these interviews that he's done in Kiev and in Ukraine, and being involved with this foreign fighter international recruitment center situation that he put together, where he was attempting to recruit foreign fighters from places like Afghanistan, from Istanbul, from places like Taiwan, and then bring them into Ukraine. And to be associated with the Azov Battalion, which is a neo-Nazi ideology battalion, part of the Ukrainian National Guard now, which we know, and you can look at this up in the CIA, you can look at this up in the New York Times, that the CIA has even trained this battalion and had 14 bases across the Ukrainian-Russian border with them to conduct assassinations. And they've conducted assassinations within Ukraine for people who they deem to be collaborators with the Russians. And they've also conducted assassinations across the border in Russia proper. In fact, one of the people who they killed was one of the negotiators for Zelensky's regime back in 2022. One of the people who had been meeting down in Istanbul was apparently they gave favorable terms to the Russians, that things that Azov didn't like, and this person was taken out when he returned back to Ukraine. So I was sort of calling up Alex Jones and saying, Alex, I'm putting money in the jar again, man, because it seems like all the stuff that you've been saying about Ukraine and the CIA and the assassinations, it's all real. It's all real. And here we have an individual that's directly one-to-one link with this battalion. And of course, they put out this big statement saying that we didn't know he was in the video. We have no idea who that was. And this is just random. And don't ask any questions about this. And please keep sending us billions of dollars. And so, to go back to what you're saying earlier, the media will sit there and the intelligence community will say, oh, it's Iran. You have to focus on Iran. Iran's the one we really need to look at. Well, here's a guy who's immediately present in Ukraine. He's over there. I haven't been able to see any reports that he was in battle, but he was certainly received training. So he comes from Ukraine and then comes back to the United States and apparently uses that training not to, defend democracy by fighting Russians. No, he takes it back to the United States and attempts to kill Donald Trump. And yet the entire media says Iran, Iran, Iran. And this guy was in Ukraine. And, you ask any questions about it and they call you a Russian propagandist, when I'm like, it's right in front of everyone's eyes. He wrote an entire manifesto about this. And then he wrote this dead man's letter, which he left with his neighbor about a month prior to this when he went into his operational cycle, saying, if this attempt failed, then someone else can finish up where I left off, and there will be a reward of $150,000. And all of a sudden, for the first time in history, the FBI doesn't want to redact or black out or put under seal this document, or the DOJ. They release it to the public. They release to the public that there's a reward, a bounty, essentially, on Donald Trump's head. And I think that's the way people need to look at this. These are failed hits, and there's a series of failed hits. This is a whodunit. And what we're doing with Bulletproof, and I mentioned the fact that we have private investigators on this, that I hope that if the book is successful, what we'll do then is to continue to push forward with that investigation and the private investigators to dig deeper and uncover if there's any links, obviously, between the two shooters. Perhaps these were any of the emails that were used by the foreign encrypted account of Thomas Matthew Crooks in contact with these WhatsApp groups and this international battalion that Ryan Wesley Routh was using in Ukraine. Are there any areas of overlap? And again, this is just something that we're working on, but the hope that I have is to turn Bulletproof into sort of a bulletproof project, I guess, for lack of a better term, and that we'd be able to issue further reports as this thing keeps going. Because even for example, so Ryan Wesley Routh, you mentioned that the election is 2 weeks away. Well, his trial actually opens up about a week after the election is when the current trial for Ryan Wesley Routh will take place in the Southern District of Miami. And he's drawn Judge Eileen Cannon, who was the same person that was the same judge that was assigned to the Mar-a-Lago documents case. And he's trying to get his lawyers now, who we have no idea who is funding these lawyers, they are trying to get her to recuse herself from the case because, well, they're trying this very hard to say without saying that she was appointed by the person who was the target of the assassination. But quite frankly, we know that they don't want this to go to trial, because if it does, then you risk the leakage, or the spillage, as you would call it in the intel community, of information, sensitive information about these Ukrainian efforts, about these organizations. And I just keep going back to the question, how was it that he was able, as a 20-year felon, to have an SKS, an unregistered long rifle, and be sitting out there with its serial number shaved off? An SKS, by the way, which is a Russian gun that is used on both sides of the conflict in Ukraine and Russia. And stands to reason, did somebody from one of these battalions help him? Did he travel back with it? How was he able to get that into Florida and then sit there for 12 hours outside the golf course and be waiting on the 6th green while Donald Trump was on the 5th?
Meanwhile, our media and the government is insisting it was Iran. Iran is trying to kill Donald Trump.
It's all Iran. It's all Iran.
It's all Iran.
It's the mullahs. It's Iran. Iran was behind this. Don't ask questions about Ukraine. Don't look into that. Don't ask about the foreign fighter group that he was involved with. Don't ask about where he got the money for all this travel. Don't ask about the fast track visas that he was attempting to get for these terrorist fighters out of Afghanistan that had also received CIA training. No. It's all about Iran. We have to focus on Iran 24/7.
Because, of course, we want to go to war with Iran, whereas Donald Trump is talking about ending the war in Ukraine, and that is what they also do not want, is to end that war. They want to keep that war going.
And in fact, I caught a clip of Donald Trump the other day on, I think it was on the PBD podcast, and when he was asked specifically about regime change in Iran, and he just said no. He said, "I'm not interested. That's not something I want to get involved with. I want to run this country, and we're not even doing a good job of that. So why would I try to get involved with another country like that?" And I really liked his instinct on that. This idea that the United States should be this. He's like, sure, obviously he's worried about threats from around the world, but this idea that the United States has the right to just go into any country and decide who their leadership would be is not something that instinctually, and it sounded like it was a very knee-jerk response from him. No, why would I do that? And of course, it's also that same mentality that puts him at risk of threatening the military-industrial complex, which is totally wedded to these ideas, and to the finance, obviously all the energy fight and the energy war that's going on, the natural gas wars that are going on in the Middle East and in the Eastern Med between Iran and Qatar and Israel now getting involved with natural gas off their coastline. And Turkey, of course, is a huge player there. And so, you've got billions and billions of dollars that are wedded to these policies. And he's just telling them, no, that I'm not interested in going in with your wars anymore.
Yep. All right, Jack. Thank you so much for being here. Good luck on this book. Jack Posobiec, written the new book that just came out today, Bulletproof, which I think is going to be a really interesting read for people, especially since there's just been silence now. It's like, okay, it happened, and then people have just completely forgotten about it. And there's so much to uncover there, and it looks like you're really onto something. So excited to read this book, and it looks like you might have follow-ups that might be coming out as well. So once again, the book is Bulletproof. I think we have an image of that. Let's go ahead and put that back up. And let's get Bulletproof up there. Where is it? Okay, there it is. Had to go through everything there. Jack, thank you so much for being here. We do have that link down below for the book. So thank you so much and best of luck.
God bless, Kim. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for watching. This was just a clip from the longer, larger show that you can catch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. That'll route you to the platform where you need to be in order to get the full uncensored show every Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Click on that link, watch the full interview. See you there.